guys, welcome back to DMSP Bioethics Radio. It's Savoir
and Maggie.
Let's talk bioethics, specifically human cloning.
What exactly is cloning?
Well, cloning is defined as the deliberate production of genetically identical individuals. Each newly produced individual is a clone of the original.
So aren't identical twins technically clones?
Yeah, monozygotic or identical twins are considered natural clones. Researchers are looking at cloning as a way to create stem cells that are genetically identical to an individual. These cells could then be used for medical purposes, possibly even for growing whole organs. A benefit of human cloning is that it can help prevent human extinction. We also pick the desired traits and get rid of negative traits such as diseases. But what are the negatives? Well, the main negative of human cloning is that there are major risks involved, such as half the normal life expectancy as a normal human due to the lack of research.
Oh, that reminds me. Do you remember the sheep named Dolly? She was a clone and went on to only live about 6.5 years, while most normal sheep live about 10 to 12 years.
Why did she die early?
Apparently, Dolly had become infected by a type of sheep retrovirus, also known as JSRV, which causes lung cancer in sheep.
Another negative is that human cloning is also interrupts the integrity and process of human species. So, Meggy, what do you think about this?
Well, I think there's not enough research about it to fully understand the topic yet. But also, I don't think it's morally right. I think we need to stick to nature and not alter the way humans are produced. Humans shouldn't be produced as a form of experiment. Then there's also the debate on whether or not these clones are just as human as any normal human. Can you imagine how a cloned child would feel knowing they aren't original? That they were made in a lab? They will grow up their whole life feeling like they don't fit in, and if this topic is such a debate on whether or not this is ethically right, the child may suffer from social, physical, and emotional harm. Also, with being able to create anyone in a lab, there is a lot of room for abusing this ability. In the book Project Cain, an organization was formed to do a study on serial killers. Clones of serial killers such as Jeffrey Dahmer were made and watched their entire lives to figure out what caused those people to become serial killers. The boy was a clone of Jeffrey Dahmer, who was removed from his home, and he never got to see the man who he had known as his father for his entire life, just so these scientists could figure out if poor living conditions in childhood caused these people to become serial killers. I think we need to just stick to the laws of nature and not mess around with experimentation because there are a lot of risks.
I've been reading that book too. It's a really interesting read. I think y'all should go check it out. It's called Project Cain by Jeffrey Gerard and is available on Amazon. But yeah, I wonder if our current world will ever produce such a spectacular human cloning with that amount of longevity. I just hope they don't use it for serial killer clone experiments, because then I will definitely be moving to go live with the Martians on Mars. But I think the subject of the book is so interesting. Like, clones are supposed to be direct and exact copies of the original, so observing them in different environments to see how they react is really smart. I feel like it would have the same effect as experimenting with the same species of organisms, like testing a sunflower plant species and seeing if the cold environment or warm environment is better. You know, those kind of experiments that we do in high school biology. But going off on what you said earlier, yes, I think more research is needed as well. The undeveloped technique makes it seem a bit unethical. It also seems that the negative side effects outweigh pros of cloning, such as the genetic clone only having half the lifespan of the original product, especially if that product is a human or organ. This seems to me that it will accelerate human extinction rather than prevent it. But another thing that also comes to my mind is if cloning is even necessary. Yeah, I get that doctors want to find new ways to save lives, but is it something that the world will be comfortable with? Like, if I got an organ transplant, I would not want it to be a clone. I would want it to be from a donor. I feel like my body would sense the synthetically created material and reject it rather than the natural organ from a donor. But to sum it up, I agree more research needs to be done before we should accept any type of cloning for use. Yeah, it seems fun now, but I feel like it could be really dangerous and not sustainable for the long run.
I agree. Now that we're on the topic of human cloning, I'm curious to find out the science behind how it's done. Should we call our scientist friends Prola and Daniela?
Good idea!
Hey guys, I heard you had some questions about human cloning. I did some research on the science behind cloning. There are two different types. Two examples that would be the most common, which is gene cloning, which is the biological materials that are produced, and therapeutic cloning, which involves swapping the DNA from nucleus between eggs for a shorter process.
I just looked up the process for cloning humans. The first step to human cloning is to extract the DNA from a donor. To do this, the scientist must get healthy somatic cells from the donor. You're probably wondering what somatic cells are. There are different kinds of cells in the average sexual organism, but somatic cells are the neutral type of cells that just hangs out, doing its job with the typical 2 complete sets of chromosomes. While red blood cells aren't somatic, white blood cells are. The cells are a common source of DNA products.
The next step is to prepare the egg. Along with obtaining the somatic cells from the donor, there must also be a viable egg cell. The nucleus of that egg cell is then extracted. The nucleus is what holds the chromosomes that contribute to reproduction.
They want a nucleus for the DNA, right?
Actually, no. For cloning, you want the empty shell to hold the embryo, so instead the DNA has to be removed from the nucleus while the egg is preserved. The third step of cloning is to insert the somatic cell material. The DNA from the somatic cell must be combined with the egg cell. The nucleus of the somatic cells is removed and placed into the empty egg from the previous step. Once that is complete, the egg has to be convinced that it's fertilized because we can't fertilize the egg. This is often done by shocking the egg with electricity. If the egg starts developing into an embryo, it can be planted into a female organism.
Wow, that's really interesting. Thank you for all the knowledge you provided us with.
Now that we've learned the biology behind how human cloning is done, what are your guys' thoughts on human cloning?
Yes, like Daniela said, all types of cloning are still in developmental stages, but I think that once scientists get a full understanding of its effects and potential, then it will be accepted throughout the world. But as scientists, I also believe that human cloning provides a sense of unnaturalness and is affront to nature in all its aspects. There's also a possibility that it can be misused by higher authority individuals, and this will lead to mistrust in scientific and governmental organizations. They can also abuse this resource and threaten the stability and advancement of humankind. Also, human cloning is prohibited and illegal in many places, so exploring the option further is limited. People, including myself, believe that human cloning challenges moral ethics as well as a biological level too.
I believe that cloning and human cloning is a necessary step for human advancement, like cavemen discovering fire. While human cloning is still in a developmental stage, it will create a positive impact on the scientific world. I think people are just scared that it is an unnatural thing. But if we look at it from a different perspective, then many people will try and understand that. For example, genetically modified organisms. We eat and create a lot of them. The majority of plants you eat are genetically modified, but they're unnecessary to meet the demands of the world. If we did not have GMOs, then half the world would starve or die. Scientists have genetically modified multiple things, and it has been successfully consumed by the world because it is not harmful. So I think we should leave an open mind into human cloning and the possibilities it could open up for the world.
Since we are scientists, we may be a little biased, so we decided to ask Office Lady Miss Courtney what her opinions were. We're with Miss Courtney here today to ask her about her opinion on human cloning.
Human cloning?
Yeah, what is your opinion on human cloning? Do you think it's ethical? Do you think it's not ethical? Do you think it can be ethical?
I mean, I think it can be ethical, but also, like, why are people wanting to clone humans? I think it's just context.
I don't know. We don't really have context. Our context is that we're supposed to, like, talk about human cloning for a project. So we just wanted to know what your, like, base opinion on human cloning is.
I mean, I think it can be ethical. I think it just really teeters a line when it comes to morality and ethics.
In what situation do you think it would be ethical?
Oof, is there really an ethical situation now that I'm thinking about it more? I think people would view the ethics of just like, oh, my loved one passed away really young or whatever, and I want them back. But then it once again teeters that line of like, how can we mess with biology like that, you know?
Yeah. What about other forms of cloning, like animal cloning?
Because we've already cloned animals before, right? That's already happened.
Yeah, would you clone an animal? Like, because some people clone it because, like, their pet died, and they're like, oh, I want my pet back. What do you think about that?
I wouldn't clone any of my pets again. I would...
Why?
I don't know. That also just seems like a pricey commodity to just have, because I feel like it's not accessible to all populations, for sure.
Okay, now what if the U.S. government wanted to use clones as weapons?
The way that sounds like a plot point to like a cheesy movie, but I could totally see it happening. I would say no. Can we not do that? That'd be great.
Okay, thank you, Miss Courtney.
Well, it was great getting another opinion about this topic. Thanks for the help, guys. You know, now I'm curious on how the idea of human cloning even started.
Well, I did some research and found that the first hybrid human clone was created in November 1998 by Advanced Cell Technology. It was created using SCNT, which stands for somatic cell nuclear transfer, in which somatic cells are taken from a willing donor and transferred to an egg and then sealed using an electric current and grown in a surrogate. A nucleus from a man's leg cell was inserted into a cow's egg from which the nucleus had been removed, and the hybrid cell was cultured and developed into an embryo, and the embryo was then destroyed after 12 days.
But human cloning isn't allowed, right? Are there laws in place to make sure people don't abuse the ability to clone?
There are currently 8 states, which include Arizona, Arkansas, Indiana, Michigan, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, and Virginia, and they prohibit human cloning for any purpose. There are also 4 states that expressly prohibit state funding of human cloning for any purpose, and this includes Arizona, Indiana, Louisiana, and Michigan.
I think it's important we make sure there are strict laws on human cloning. There are a lot of potential risks in doing it, and we don't know quite enough about it yet.
I agree. Well, that's it for this discussion.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of DMSP Bioethics. Let us know your thoughts in the comments.